What I've argued for a long time as it relates to Epstein is that, there's been a pretty much exclusive focus on his sex crimes, but not his financial crimes. Epstein was a guy that, obviously the media narrative since his arrest and his death has tried to frame him as a great Gatsby kind of figure. He was all talk and just a charlatan and this and that. No, he was kept around by elite figures because he was very good at helping them evade taxes and was very good at money laundering and had a very, very intimate knowledge of the offshore banking system, where a lot of these families historically hide their money. So, like the Pritzker family, for example, have early ties to organized crime going back to like the 20s and 30s, and they were one of the main clients early on of Castle Bank, which brings together some organized crime-linked figures.
The world knows Jeffrey Epstein as a monster who trafficked girls, but that was just a distraction. While headlines obsessed over his sex crimes, the real scandal was hiding in plain sight. Epstein wasn't just a predator, he was the elite's favorite money magician. The media painted him as a fake Great Gatsby, all talk and no substance. But the truth? He was the go-to guy for billionaires who needed fortunes to disappear. Whitney Webb has ripped the lid off this story, exposing how Epstein's real talent wasn't networking. It was financial sorcery, offshore accounts, shell companies, and tax evasion on a global scale. Take the Pritzker family, whose fortune is linked to Prohibition-era mob connections. They weren't just friends of Epstein, they were his clients. His real operation involved concealing dirty money and making it disappear. However, the sex scandal got the spotlight because it was salacious. But the money trail? That leads straight to the top. Epstein didn't just know the elite's secrets, he managed their wealth. And that's why his financial crimes stay buried. Because if that story ever gets told, it won't just take down a dead man, it'll expose the system that lets the rich play by different rules. We will now bring you clips from Whitney Webb's latest interview to gain more insight. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the rest of the video.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously there was that big, highly publicized release of what was said to be phase one of the Epstein files, with a lot of, Twitter influencers and other figures given these binders. And obviously that didn't go over, I think, the way they anticipated it would, mainly because, the files themselves didn't really had been heavily hyped. Including, among pro-Trump media figures, and then obviously the documents therein, most of which had been previously released and made publicly available, didn't live up to the hype. And then there was this effort to sort of say that, oh, well, Pam Bondi didn't have all the documents, and it was this one office that was sort of withholding them. And so, supposedly FBI agents have been digging through them with the plans to release them. But then some of these figures that had promoted the Epstein releases previously in media, like Megyn Kelly, came out and said, oh, well, as I understand it, these documents aren't really the bombshells. There's not really anything explosive in there. So there's been sort of this effort to, on the one hand, claim that more is to come, and then also downplay the significance of what will come out later. And as I understand it, the claims that were made about what the documents that were being allegedly withheld were related to documents generated by the FBI upon their raiding of Epstein's property in New York City in 2019. I have a few thoughts about that. One is it would be nice if the FBI would explain why Epstein's other residences were not raided, like the Zorro Ranch property in New Mexico, never raided. And then why, it took them a month to get to the island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James. Be nice to know that. And of course, some of arguably some very important documents, I believe, could be obtained by the Department of Justice that are held not by the FBI, but the U.S. Virgin Islands, because there was this case involving the U.S. Virgin Islands and JP Morgan as it related to Epstein. And that case got settled out of court, so it didn't go to trial. But I believe those documents would be very, very, very telling. But I would argue the reason they won't come out is because one of the people subpoenaed as part of that investigation was Elon Musk. He wasn't necessarily accused of wrongdoing, but was subpoenaed because he was suspected of having had some sort of involvement with Epstein and JP Morgan. And there are allegations, of course, not really allegations, but, it was reported, before Musk was closely affiliated with Trump, that Epstein had been advising Tesla and was part of this effort in 2018 to take Tesla private with Gulf oil money or Saudi money. And at the time, Epstein was advising Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and was also known to have a close relationship with the elite families of the United Arab Emirates, and also Kuwait, and I think Bahrain as well. So perhaps they don't want to have that really be explored at this point. But some of the other figures that were subpoenaed and accused of wrongdoing, because in the case of the USVI case, it was specifically that JP Morgan's accounts with Epstein and relationship with Epstein was connected to the human trafficking, sex trafficking. And so you have people like Larry Page and Sergey Brin of Google, the Google co-founders, being subpoenaed as part of that. You have Tom Pritzker of Hyatt Hotels being subpoenaed. And of course, the Pritzkers are a very powerful family in Chicago, specifically very connected, for example, to the rise of Barack Obama as a politician, but also a lot of prominent think tanks like the Carnegie Endowment run by a Pritzker. And I think Tom Pritzker, who was subpoenaed here, ran for a long time or was chairman of the board of CSIS, which is one of these very national security adjacent think tanks with a lot of influence on U.S. national security policy. So probably people that can afford to be sort of left out of the limelight, I guess, because a lot of, what I've argued for a long time as it relates to Epstein is that, there's been a pretty much exclusive focus on his sex crimes, but not his financial crimes. Epstein was a guy that, obviously the media narrative since his arrest and his death has tried to frame him as a great Gatsby kind of figure. He was all talk and just a charlatan and this and that. No, he was kept around by elite figures because he was very good at helping them evade taxes and was very good at money laundering and had a very, very intimate knowledge of the offshore banking system, where a lot of these families historically hide their money. So like the Pritzker family, for example, have early ties to organized crime going back to like the 20s and 30s. And they were one of the main clients early on of Castle Bank, which brings together some organized crime linked figures. And also the CIA through Paul Hellawell, who was a CIA banker that helped set it up. And, it helped launder money for organized crime interests and also some of these families like the Pritzkers who later became very politically powerful. So
the Epstein document dump missed the mark because the true revelations remain concealed. Why did the FBI overlook his New Mexico ranch? Why the delay in raiding his island? And why suppress the JP Morgan case that subpoenaed Elon Musk, Google's founders, and the Pritzker family? Epstein wasn't merely a predator, he was the elite's financial fixer. The sex scandal is a diversion from the real crime, a clandestine financial network shielding the ultra-wealthy. The real scandal isn't just the blackmail tapes, it's the financial web connecting Obama's backers, Pritzker's, Crowns, JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, and Leslie Wexner's empire. Courts buried Deutsche Bank's Epstein ties after a judge's son was murdered. According to Whitney, Trump won't expose Clinton's visits, and Megyn Kelly downplayed the docs. Why? Because this isn't left versus right, it's elites protecting their dirty money. The files we aren't seeing? That's where the bombshells hide. Let's watch more clips from the interview.
Penny Pritzker was Obama's Secretary of Commerce, right. And the Pritzkers and the Crowns, who, Lester Crown was part of the mega group that we talked about earlier, and the Crown family, going back to Henry Crown, have extensive organized crime ties as well. They sort of helped Barack Obama's early career, for example, and sort of helped propel him to the presidency, and first as a senator, right? But sort of, have a lot of influence on Democratic politics in Chicago in particular. So it's really not surprising that you'd have a Pritzker be governor there. But they're quite a powerful and influential family. It doesn't really get talked about a lot. And speaking of the Crowns, on the board of JP Morgan for a long time was James Crown, Lester Crown's son, who, along with banking interests in Ohio, intimately tied to Leslie Wexner, basically had created modern day JP Morgan with Jamie Dimon at the helm. They're totally responsible for Jamie Dimon being in charge of that bank, namely Crown, and also this guy named John Kessler, who is just as much a Leslie Wexner henchman as Epstein was, and was intimately involved with Epstein as well. So, those are the people that put Jamie Dimon in charge. Arguably, that explains why why Epstein and JP Morgan had such a close relationship. And I think they just couldn't have that case go to court. So Pam Bondi could get a lot of that information if she wanted to, but I don't think there's any interest in exploring that.
What about Megyn Kelly? You said that are you saying that she was downplaying it, or are you saying she was just reporting on?
Yeah, well, I don't regularly watch her show. I want to make that very clear, full disclosure. But I was shown a clip that had been posted on Twitter of her subsequently after the first release, saying that it was her understanding that the documents that were allegedly being sifted through after the phase 1 release were not really as significant as some had been led to believe. There's also this claim that gets circulated a lot that there's like a client list the FBI is sitting on, and it's really doubtful as to whether or not that actually exists or not. So, the idea of the client list is like, who did Epstein film and who is compromised? Will that come out? And, we pretty much can look at a few names of who were likely the people that were compromised, but I don't think that's any substitute for going after the people who sponsored the compromising, right? Because obviously they're the ones trying to control the people who were compromised for their benefit. So you should absolutely look at that. And so, I think this is just kind of an effort to, make it appear like there's transparency when there really isn't as much transparency as people are being led to believe. And also, transparency in this case is no substitute for investigating and prosecuting people who absolutely should be targeted, like Leslie Wexner. Right. And his, business empire that Epstein helped build. Epstein's relationship with Bear Stearns, which arguably helped set off the 2008 financial crisis, absolutely should be scrutinized. It has not. His relationship with JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, obviously the JP Morgan one was covered up because they settled out of court and kept all the information from coming out in court. And then also there's the case of, Epstein and the Deutsche Bank case, where, one of the judge overseeing it, her son was murdered as she was about to start overseeing that case. And then no one reports on it, and then it settles out of court as well. Obviously, I think there is some stuff there with the money flows that is a big problem for both parties. And so even though you think it would be politically expedient, for the Trump administration, to report on, Tom Pritzker or something like that, since his family's so tied to like the Obama network or whatever, it's not going to happen. Because you pull on some of that and it just airs out too much dirty laundry of the whole system that absolutely involves both parties. And also, there's the case too that the Trump administration could have put out information related to Epstein's White House visits during the Clinton administration, which you think again would be politically expedient for the Trump administration, but there's no way they'll touch that. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's related to this, there was arms trafficking and all sorts of other crazy things going on with, a lot of people that had previously been involved in the Iran-Contra network. And, Trump world has ties to that. So I don't think they'd be interested in having that come out. But it would be very nice if they did. But there's plenty of aspects of the Epstein case that could easily be obtained by Pam Bondi and released, and they won't be.
The Jeffrey Epstein saga has become the Rorschach test of American conspiracy theories, revealing more about those obsessing over it than about the case itself. For years, the far-right fever swamps have buzzed with promises of an impending revelation that would shake the world, the mythical Epstein files that would supposedly expose a global cabal of satanic Democrats, Hollywood elites, and deep state operatives. This fantasy persists, despite mounting evidence that the promised revelations are nothing more than political theater, designed to keep the MAGA base engaged while carefully avoiding any real exposure of powerful networks. At the heart of this charade lies a fundamental contradiction that Trump's most loyal followers refuse to confront. The same man they believe will expose the Epstein network, Donald Trump, was himself part of Epstein's social circle for years. Photographs show them partying together at Mar-a-Lago. Trump himself once praised Epstein as a terrific guy. Yet somehow, in the MAGA imagination, Trump has been recast as Epstein's nemesis rather than his associate. This cognitive dissonance speaks volumes about the power of political tribalism to reshape reality. The origins of this mass delusion trace back to QAnon, the pro-Trump cult that constructed an elaborate fantasy about a secret war against global elites engaged in unspeakable crimes. When Epstein died in his jail cell under suspicious circumstances, QAnon adherents saw confirmation of their wildest theories. Never mind that the real Epstein story was far more complex, involving financial crimes, intelligence connections, and systemic failures in the justice system. The conspiracy crowd needed a simple narrative. Democrats were evil, Trump was the hero, and the files would prove it. Trump, ever the showman, knew exactly how to play this game. He began teasing the release of Epstein documents, promising explosive revelations in 2 weeks, a phrase that became a running joke when nothing materialized. His attorney general, Pam Bondi, staged a theatrical document dump, handing out binders of supposedly classified Epstein files to right-wing influencers. The embarrassing truth? These were mostly already public records containing nothing new. Even former Fox News star Megyn Kelly admitted on air that the much-hyped revelations were a dud. This pattern reveals the essential nature of the Trump political operation. It's not about delivering results, it's about maintaining the illusion of impending victory. The 2 weeks promise mirrors his repeated claims about healthcare plans, infrastructure weeks, and other phantom policy initiatives that never materialize. With the Epstein files, as with so much else, Trump understands that the promise of revelation is more valuable than the revelation itself. Keeping supporters waiting maintains their engagement while requiring no actual action. The tragic death of Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent victims, exposed the ugliest dimensions of this conspiracy circus. Rather than acknowledging her death as the heartbreaking result of lifelong trauma, the MAGA outrage machine immediately began spinning dark theories about her being suicided. Influencers like Laura Loomer and Nick Sorter amplified these baseless claims, demanding the immediate release of Epstein files before more victims get suicided. The cruel irony is that Giuffre had spent years courageously testifying about her abuse, including allegations against Prince Andrew and other powerful men. She wasn't hiding secrets, she had already told her story. But facts don't matter in the conspiracy world, where every tragedy must be twisted to fit the narrative. Beneath this circus lies a more disturbing truth that neither Trump nor his followers want to confront. The real Epstein scandal wasn't just about sex trafficking, it was about how power protects itself across party lines. Investigative journalists have documented Epstein's role as a financial fixer for the ultra-wealthy, helping them move money offshore, evade taxes, and launder fortunes. His connections spanned Wall Street giants like J.P. Morgan and Deutsche Bank, political dynasties including the Clintons and Pritzkers, and intelligence networks through figures like Leslie Wexner. These relationships reveal a system of elite protection that transcends political affiliation, exactly why no powerful faction truly wants them exposed. The sealed settlement between J.P. Morgan and Epstein's victims tells this story in microcosm. The bank paid $75 million to make the case disappear rather than allow damaging testimony about its long relationship with Epstein. Similarly, Deutsche Bank's Epstein connections were buried after the shocking murder of a judge's son overseeing related cases. These aren't the actions of some mythical deep state, they're standard operating procedure for protecting powerful interests. And Trump, despite his populist rhetoric, has proven just as willing to protect this system as any establishment politician. This explains why the promised Epstein files will never satisfy the MAGA crowd's bloodlust. The documents they imagine, containing a neat list of Democratic pedophiles, don't exist. The real files would implicate financiers, corporate leaders, and power brokers across the political spectrum. They would expose how the system really works, rather than feeding partisan fantasies. That's why Trump won't release them, and why his base would likely reject them if he did. The Epstein file obsession reveals the fundamental dishonesty of Trump's political project. He sells himself as the outsider who will smash corrupt systems while actually being deeply enmeshed in those very systems. He promised to drain the swamp, but filled his administration with lobbyists and corporate insiders. He vowed to lock up Hillary Clinton, but instead had his Justice Department pursue low-level process crimes. He swore he'd expose the deep state, but when given the chance, he protected it. The Epstein saga is just the latest iteration of this pattern. All hype, no delivery. As Trump's second term continues, even some loyalists are beginning to whisper uncomfortable questions. Why hasn't he released the files? Why hasn't he arrested the supposed cabal? The answers point to an uncomfortable truth. Trump wasn't ever really fighting the elites. He was, and remains, one of them. His relationship with Epstein wasn't an anomaly. It was characteristic of the world he's always moved in. The promised reckoning was never coming, because it would implicate too many people like him. The real tragedy of the Epstein case is how it's been reduced to political theater. What should have been a moment of national reckoning about power, privilege, and justice has become just another partisan football. The victims deserve better. The truth deserves better. But in our current political climate, where conspiracy theories generate more engagement than facts, and where tribal loyalty trumps all else, the charade continues. The files will always be coming in 2 weeks. The arrests will always be just around the corner. And the marks will keep waiting for a revelation that was never real to begin with. As we wrap up, do you think we'll ever see the full truth about Epstein's financial network? Why or why not? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.